Hi, welcome to Atrium Talks. Hi, Bhagwan.
Hi, Deepa. So far we have talked about how to build pockets of excellence everywhere in the organization and how to scale it up.
Hmm.
But sometimes you need to innovate because the world around us is changing. And to extend that excellence into that arena perhaps requires different ways of thinking about it. Is that right?
Yes, I think accelerated technology adoption, innovation, like you said, and new models of competition, new competitors on the horizon require, in some sense, usher in discontinuous change, right?
Yeah.
And companies need to respond to this discontinuous change with new business models.
Yeah.
And the trouble is that most firms are bad at it. The most persistent trend in business is the inability of incumbents to respond when technologies and markets change. We talked about this, remember, in EdTech, we said
Yeah.
when there's a new business model, new competition on the horizon, most universities, didn't respond to it. And HBS did, right? And MIT did. But the compelling response that some universities had, these two being exemplars of that, we didn't see that with others.
So, why is it? Why are most firms bad at it?
This is almost a recap of our last, the episode in the last season. But I think there are two, three things quickly, right? So one is that the disrupting innovation often is inferior. It comes in as an inferior product. It misses your attention, so you're not incentivized to respond to it. The second is that it looks very different from you in its origin. Ultimately, it intersects with your market, but in its origin, it looks different. Remember, we said online
Yes.
learning.
Yeah.
And then it also is, therefore, you don't have the vision for it, right? We said, when we say why is online learning inferior, we say things like it doesn't have peer-to-peer engagement, it doesn't have classroom learning, all of it which is defined by our measures of and our vision of learning.
So it's almost like a competence trap that
It's a
I'm
competency
very
trap.
good at this and
Exactly.
I don't want to do it. Things.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So you have years and years of experience of doing something, and therefore you have very limited adaptability to this new innovation that's come there on the scene. And finally, you have to break away from who you are as an organization in terms of your resources, in terms of your capabilities, in terms of your processes. You have to reinvent yourself fundamentally. And if you ask the people who have to reinvent themselves whether they want to and whether they want to adapt,
They're going to say no.
they're going to say no.
Okay.
So
So
you're
this
trapped.
is not easy to do
It's not easy.
because you are caught into this competence trap. People who are good at it don't want to change it,
Correct.
but the world isn't stopping. The
Correct.
world is changing.
And therefore you get disrupted.
So, what advice are we going to give people on how to manage this?
If you begin with the assumption that you're not responding because you're held captive by an existing way of doing business, then don't hold the response to this innovation captive to that business, right?
Yeah.
Create an organization within an organization that is equipped with its own decision making processes and is unencumbered by the biases or the decision making processes of the old organization. So
Okay, so the incumbents, the existing people who are good at this, don't ask them
Don't ask
how you're
them.
going to change it.
Don't ask them.
Create a different organization that is allowed to think freely,
Exactly.
unencumbered, you use the
Exactly.
word. But they by itself won't be able to do it. You have to empower them. And how do you
Yes.
empower them?
Yes, I think so. This again goes back to what we had talked about earlier, right? Which is this mandate has to come from the top. So the leadership
Has to come from the
yeah,
top.
the
Okay.
leadership has to set this organization in place. It has to give it the required autonomy, the required profit model, the required processes, all of that to be able to respond, experiment, learn, and grow. So that needs to be done.
So this organization within an organization, most of the people are not going to be the existing people, but at least some of the top people have to be part of that.
Correct.
They have to authorize it
Yes.
and they have to empower it.
Correct. And I'm saying, include, I don't know if you want to completely include people from the existing organization to understand perhaps the interdependencies with
Yes.
the old model, to understand, with a degree of empathy, what the concerns are, all of that, right? So that you can create appropriate incentives if you want to integrate. But yes, this has to be a separate organization.
Okay.
keep in mind that this is a short-term response that we're talking about, right? I think in the long run, you want to create an organization that is equipped to deal with this kind of discontinuous change on a continued basis.
And how do we do that? How do we create this culture in which people are responding to these changes in the long term?
You create a learning organization.
And how do we do that?
So, so Nadella talks about this, right? He says that when he took over as CEO, his wife gave him this book by Carol Dweck, which is, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And he says that, he went on to inculcate a growth mindset throughout the organization, which is you were rewarding learning, you were rewarding initiative, you were even rewarding failure. Right?
Yeah.
But you stopped rewarding outputs and you stopped taking stock of who's the smartest person in the room or who is, the most output-driven person in the room. You start to reward people to learn and unlearn behaviors.
So I think this is an important point because oftentimes people talk about it, especially in entrepreneurship, that, you have to reward failure. But usually it's just talk. The question is, how do we do it? And I think what you're saying is if you start rewarding input
Effort.
rather than output,
Correct.
then implicitly you will be rewarding failures because it's not the failure you're rewarding, you are actually rewarding experimentation and learning.
Yes.
And that's what's going to help in the long term.
Yes. And I think nudges, right, in all facets of the organization. For instance, reward systems is one, incentive systems is one, but also, just simple things like meetings he talks about where they said, hey, was this a learning meeting? Did we learn something in this? Right? Did we learn something new, about either our customers or about our decision makers in this? So just small nudges, which are constantly leading you to reflect and learn and unlearn, I think is useful. Because then people are not committed to one way of being. They are able to quickly unlearn and adopt new ways of being.
Okay. So I think those are two important prescriptive answers. One is organization within an organization that is free to think, but it is empowered by the top leadership, which is a short-term interventionist answer. But the long-term answer is to reward learning, reward experimentation, and reward failure itself, or the freedom to fail.
And it's very important that all of these be led by people. Again, this goes back to people and appointments and hiring and talent management. That these efforts be led by people. When you look at people, don't look at them through the prism of skills, but look at them through the prism of values, right? So then you hire people who want what you want, and they will pick up skills, right? So hire people who want to be part of a learning organization.
Okay. So Deepa, we need to try this out with our own field.
Yes.
Education.
Yes.
A model that hasn't changed. We are going to use this idea and see how to think about education in the new way because it needs new models and we are going to employ some of these principles, but that requires an entirely separate episode.
Yes. Amen to that. Thank you, Bhavan.
We are saying if you are an executive, if you are a working professional,
take that learning.
You don't need to stop learning.
Correct.
You need to continue to learn as you're working.